Now that's what the Word says about it, and that covers the whole thing. A lack of knowledge of spiritual law. The lack of knowledge of the laws that govern healing. The lack of knowledge of the laws that govern prosperity. The lack of knowledge of the laws that govern salvation. The lack of knowledge of the laws that govern the very universe. The very thing that put this thing into motion in the first place was a force of faith. The spiritual world is not some hanky-panky world that has no rule and regulation. God's world is the spiritual world, and it is governed by exact law, exact knowledge that never fails. And when we learn His law and His Word, the Word of God tells us we shall be blessed in all of our goings and in all of our coming and in all of our deeds, and we shall lengthen the days of our lives and all of the seed after us. Glory to God. The lack of knowledge that causes these things to work. Now, we've had religious excuses to excuse the unanswerable, quotation mark, questions. They were answerable. You got a Bible. But you're not going to get it with your carnal mind. You're going to have to get it through the Spirit of God. Do you know that? And God don't operate like men. Men ought to operate like God, but most of them don't. The unanswerable question, why me? Well, why did God take my baby? I got news for you, friend. He didn't do it. He didn't do it. I thought the Bible said God giveth and God taketh away. That's preached at nearly every funeral I ever been to, except the ones I was preaching. But did you know that that statement was made in unbelief? That statement was made out of a lack of knowledge in the life of Job. Job didn't know what was going wrong with it. If he'd have known, he'd stopped it. And he thought God was the one taking it away from him. We got the record in there that God wasn't the one doing it. Satan tried to get God to do it and said, put your hand against him, he'll curse you to your face. God said, no, I'm not going to do it. He's my man. But then God tells us the key to the whole book of Job. He said, behold. Now, do you know what behold looks and says? You know what the word means? It means look and see. Behold does not mean. How do we use behold? Actually, the way we use behold religiously don't mean anything. It means pretty word. It's kind of like whether to hear for. You know, it don't really mean anything to most people that read it. Behold. But now, you know, if a thing had said, now look at him. Now you'd understood that, see. But actually, that's what, if God had been talking Texas, that's what he'd have said. If he'd have been speaking Texan, he would have said, now look at him. He's about to tell Satan something, in other words, that he doesn't know. He says, behold, look and see. He, talking about Job, he is in thy power. Now, most people have the mistaken idea that God gave the devil power over Job. He didn't. Job had given him that power. God is the one that built the hedge around him. The hedge was down, but it was a spiritual hedge, and Satan didn't know it. Now, in the very first chapter of Job, we find out how he tore it down. The Bible said that Job made the same sacrifice continually. In other words, he wasn't doing it in faith. Every time his kids got together, he'd go give a sacrifice. Oh my God, they're liable to sin. Oh, there's no telling what that bunch is liable to do. Oh, I'm going to have a storm and ruin my crop. Oh, you know, oh, the bollweevils is going to get my cotton and the worms are going to get my tomatoes. Oh, and he just going on like that. I better go do a sacrifice. And he'd do a sacrifice and get up there and think, oh, it's going to happen. In other words, the sacrifice didn't mean a thing. Now, the first sacrifice that he gave in faith was after God had appeared to them two religious guys as beating his brains out, telling him God did it to him. And God spoke in a whirlwind. God had about all that he wanted. Now, you know, you talk ugly about a fella just so long. And they telling Job that God did all this, see? And Job said, yes, God giveth and God taketh away. And God hadn't took away anything. And God spoke out of that whirlwind and said, you have spoken wrongly of me. And the only way you're going to get forgiveness for it is if you can get Job to make a sacrifice in faith. Now, if he makes a sacrifice in faith, you're going to get forgiven. In other words, if he keeps doing like he's been doing, all three of you going down a tube.